Hi, and welcome back to part 4 of our Organising mini lecture series. In this mini lecture, what I really want to talk about is the organisational design trends that are happening today. So, what are we seeing in organisational design? We're seeing this change in the mindset of organisations where customers are now at the top of the pyramid, who are served by workers, who are supported by managers, and who are then supported by our CEOs and our executive teams. And what this is doing is that it's changing the perception, it's changing the conversations that exist within an organisation, and it changes the controls that we put in place in order to suit the customer needs. It also changes the perception and even the message that's given to workers about how they are perceived within the organisation. So it's really shaking up industry a lot at the moment, and that is certainly something that we're seeing within organisations today. We're also seeing this shorter chain of command. So we're seeing flatter organisations exist, less managerial levels. And in fact, in many organisations, the first place that they look for cutting costs when it comes to redundancies and redesign is management. And the current trend is to have a flatter organisation, particularly in Australia. Now, there's some cultural issues that come out of there where we don't like too many layers of management, but certainly that is something that's coming out in terms of the trends. We're also seeing this less unity of command and wider spans of control. So more people are allowed to do more flexible things than they normally do in total, and there's less bureaucratic organisations out there, with the exception of the government-owned and operated ones. We're also seeing this push towards more delegation and empowerment, and in fact, employees are expecting that more from their employer now than they ever have. I don't want to be told what to do, I want to be engaged through that process. So we tend to move from centralisation to decentralisation. We're seeing this shift and this fundamental shift from corporate into sites and services or products. So we're actually pushing away from this you control me to I want to have control over what I'm doing, and I want to have more say in how I operate my day-to-day business. And that's an interesting organisational trend. So here it's depicted. So we've got this wide span of command wide span of control at the front, and it creates this flat structure. But it also, in creating this flat structure, starts to unpack more issues when it comes to who delegates to whom, right? So if I've got 10 people that work underneath me, what do I and how do I delegate that work up? We're getting narrow spans of control, which is creating a tall structure in other organisations. And that's, again, really interesting to see because we're actually ending up having more managers in some organisations and less organisational managers in others. So that's really fascinating within the market today. So let's talk about delegation. Delegation is the process of distributing and entrusting work to other people. All right, so it happens all the time. When a manager goes on leave, they have to delegate their services to someone else in the organisation. But it doesn't always go to plan. And in fact, there are some core ground rules that are often forgotten when it comes to managerial delegation. First thing you need to do is carefully choose a delegate, right? You want to clearly define the responsibilities, agree on objectives and standards of performance, and you want to agree on a performance timetable, and that's really important and often where things go wrong. So there's this unmet expectation between a delegatee and a delegator when they start this relationship, because one works in one standard and the other works in another standard, and now one may be higher than the other and it may be unbalanced. If you don't have that conversation, then the issues are going to come up. You also need to, as a delegator, so the person giving delegation responsibilities, you need to give authority and show trust. Now, one of the fundamental principles of power is that if I give you power, I don't lose any, right? So by giving authority and showing trust, you're actually not losing anything in the process, but you are entrusting them to do your job. And that is where you carefully choose your delegate. You also want to be able to provide performance support and feedback. So sometimes we delegate to people and then assume that they know what they're doing. Now, they're often not always going to tell you that they don't know what they're doing, but if you're not supporting them through that process and being quite proactive, then things can go wrong. The other thing that you need to do is help when things go wrong, which sounds simple. However, it's often forgotten. So if we've got a new delegator or even an old delegator but a new responsibility, if we're not actually providing that ongoing assistance and doing it in a transition rather than just I'm on holidays tomorrow, you're up, then we are going to run into problems. So delegation is really important because as a manager, that's going to be what you're going to do. And it's certainly in your university experience, you will delegate tasks when it comes to group assignments, and you need to be able to have these expectations met for both parties so that it ends up being really positive rather than negative. All right, so because we're using more and more team structures that create horizontal structures, or we're using more cross-functional teams, then what we tend to see is this change in trends when it comes to organizational design. So we do see flatter organizations, we see taller organizations, we see people with lots of different perceptions of how important customers are versus workers, and there's lots of new trends that are coming out. So it's really important to keep on top of these trends because as a manager, these are the things that you're going to be dealing with in the future.